Let's talk about what happens when somebody isn't following these principles. They're, say, eating within a really wide eating window, spiking blood sugar throughout the day. Talk about what happens over time in the body when we're doing that.
You know what a good way to think about it is? What would happen if every day you got up and decided you were going to run a marathon? You were going to like push your athletic endeavors over and over and over again. Eventually, the body is going to end up getting injured. So, what's happening when we're eating all day long is we're never leaving time for rest and recovery. And that is how we ended up in this metabolic mess, is that we're eating all day long, never tapping into this fat burning system. And then we're eating these ultra processed foods that have our dopamine up, have our glucose up. These foods have obesogens in them that are like hijacking our stem cells and causing our stem cells to start to make fat cells. So poor food quality, high chemicals, you need some rest and recovery. We've got to have rest and recovery. Now, let's say you decide, oh, I don't eat those. I eat really well. Great. You might not need as much rest and recovery if you're truly looking at food like medicine. But most people aren't doing that. Most people are organizing their food decisions based off their taste buds. And those taste buds have been hijacked by a food system that has every bit of incentive to keep you coming back eating more. So we've got to really use fasting as this recovery tool so the body can repair itself and then go back into food. It's kind of like even like sleep. Like, what would happen if you just stayed up day after day after day? Your body wouldn't function as well. It's the same thing. We are not meant to eat all day long, every day. We need breaks.
Well, let's take it right down to the cell. So we're spiking blood sugar, blood glucose is high, insulin's high. Insulin is jamming glucose into the cell. The mitochondria gets overwhelmed. Talk about that process.
Yeah, so this one's really interesting, and there's a lot of directions we can go on this. But if you think about the cellular parts on the inside, those mitochondria, people are paying tens of thousands of dollars in the biohacking world right now to like hack into these mitochondria. Well, the first thing to know is those mitochondria have two fuel sources. They need glucose and they need ketones. So, and those mitochondria make ATP, which is the unit of energy that you need to heal, to function. Those mitochondria also upregulate glutathione, which is what will coordinate a process called methylation, so that detoxes the cell. So those mitochondria are really important. And they have two fuel sources. They have glucose and they have ketones. Now, if we go back, I know one of the things I love about talking to you, Jesse, is you've talked to like everybody, right? And you've been doing this a long time. If we look at the trends of where we've been with food, the ketogenic diet came out, it was popular like 15 years ago. And everybody started to lose weight. Everybody's like, my mental clarity is so insane. It's doing so well, because all of a sudden, people got a little glimmer of that second fuel source. They were like, oh, I work so much better when I give myself both fuel sources. But then what happened is we got everybody going low carb and too restricted, and women, that didn't work so well for women. And so now we kind of threw the ketogenic diet out. I'm saying that we need to go into these longer periods of fasting, anywhere, usually on a daily basis, you're talking 13 hours, 15 hours, 17 hours where you're not eating. So you make a ketone so that you're giving those mitochondria half of their fuel source. So, it's kind of like, I don't know if you've talked to Martha Beck. She's putting out a book right now on anxiety. And when I brought her on my podcast, she said something to me about anxiety that I had never really thought about, which was most people are only using one side of their brain. We live in a very left-brained world, and everything created in our world was created with this left brain, and we're not tapping into our right brain. And the right brain is connection and community and creativity. And we've got to bring back things like art and our imagination. And when we do that, we are now using both sides of our brain. And when you use both sides of your brain, anxiety goes away. We were not meant to use only one side of our brain. Okay, same analogy with the mitochondria. When you are using both fuel sources, you are going to get a different type of energy that most people will say feels like they're supercharged. Because without small pulses of ketones, you are actually depriving these mitochondria of half of their fuel sources. And the mitochondria wasn't meant to live off of glucose alone. Just like it wasn't meant to live off ketones alone. It was meant to have both fuel sources.
Let's stay on the mitochondria here for a bit. You mentioned the fact that people are trying to biohack these. You just gave us a good biohack there, providing them with both fuel sources.
Yep.
What other things do you do specifically to keep those healthy, the mitochondria?
Yeah, it's a really good question. The mitochondria also have a bilipid membrane around the outside of them. So that means they're very susceptible to the fats we eat. So like I've always said forever, like one of the most immediate food principles that you should make outside of the blood sugar one is choose your fat wisely, because bad fats are going to glom up that mitochondria and they'll glom up the cellular membrane, the outside. And now you can't get nutrients in there. So, you could take all the supplements in the world, but you still can't get them into the mitochondria, can't get them into the cell because these inflammatory fats block everything out. So we have the ketone needs, we have the fat needs. The third need of the mitochondria is it's actually an absence. It needs you to not inundate your system with toxins. Because on the outside of those membranes of the mitochondria live little receptor sites. And if you have toxins that flood in the cell, they will go into that membrane and they will start to change how much energy that mitochondria puts out. So like when we go back to the principle of eat nature's carbs, not man-made carbs, I'm saying that because man-made carbs are full of chemicals. So if we just remove the chemicals, then let's focus in on how do we get the right nourishment. We're not going to gum up all of those receptor sites. Now, other really fun needs of the mitochondria, and I'm sure you've done a lot of podcasts on the mitochondria, but they have light needs. So this is why everybody's red lighting it. It's like those mitochondria can be stimulated by certain frequencies or certain lengths of light. Well, it's interesting if you think about that, because where do we get red light in the day? We get it in the morning, we get it at night. So, maybe instead of buying a big red light machine, so you decide how you want to spend your money, but why don't we just go out in the sunrise and sunset and try to get our body exposed to some of these red light that actually is important for this mitochondrial stimulation. So, and then the last one I think is really interesting is oxygen, which is why, there's the list of the mitochondrial needs are long, but oxygen is really interesting too, because as we get older, those mitochondria become less receptive to oxygen. So I like one of the things I tell my community is, can we focus in on really having workouts where you're pushing it and you're sucking oxygen in? That kind of oxygen deprivation can cause those mitochondria to pull in whatever oxygen they can get in there. So that's way outside of food, but those are the kind of things that I think of when it comes to mitochondria.
And I believe you have hyperbaric oxygen at home, a system that you can go into, correct?
I do. And I use it because it's compressed oxygen, and that compressed oxygen can get into those mitochondria and those cells and nourish those cells, so that you're not, as we get older, we become less efficient at absorbing oxygen. So when you compress oxygen, now it can get into the cells easier.
Let's come back to the bad fats. And you mentioned how these can get entangled within the mitochondrial membranes and the cell membranes. Let's talk specifically what fats we're talking about there.
So the biggies are canola oil, cottonseed oil, and corn oil. So think the 3 C's, just to try to help people remember this. Then we've got to look at some of them like partially hydrogenated oils. I don't know if you know the story behind that, but they decided about a little over 10, 15 years ago that partially hydrogenated oils were a major factor contributing to heart problems, cardiovascular problems. And when they identified that, they said, well, we're gonna ask that all the food companies take it out by the year 2025. So we're coming up on that time. But meanwhile, they kept it in our food system for 10, 15 years, knowing that it's causing cardiovascular disease. So partially hydrogenated oils will soon no longer be an option to you, but they're a major one. Then we have our vegetable oils. We have our soybean oil, safflower and sunflower oil are some of the worst. And those are the ones you're going to mostly see on labels and in your restaurants.
If you enjoyed that clip, you're going to want to head over here and catch a full episode. I'll see you over there.
If you're feeling more confused than ever, then let's just come back to some basic principles like these 5 foundational food ideas and learning how to fast. And you will see so much change in your